Hello, I'm Bert Eliason with the PBIS Applications Training Team, and we want to share some information with you about the use of multiracial identification when using the SWIS ethnicity reports and the SWIS Drilldown tool. Our PBIS Applications Support Team sometimes receives requests for information related to the identification of multiracial students on the SWIS ethnicity reports, as well as how the inclusion and exclusion filters on the SWIS Drilldown tool work, especially when considering students identified as multiracial. In order to help you understand how these tools work, let me introduce you to two students I've added to my demo school account. First, we have Stephen Smith, a non-Hispanic male who identifies as Native and Asian. And we also have Cheryl Johnson, a non-Hispanic female who identifies as both white and black. Neither of these students is on an IEP or a 504 plan, but both were involved in a food fight incident in our cafeteria recently, so each has a referral as a result. Let's address the SWIS ethnicity report question first. The support team sometimes finds themselves responding to questions related to students who identify as multiracial. The question usually goes something like this. At our school, we have a student who identifies as Native and Asian. Since he identifies as being of two separate races, does he show up on the SWIS ethnicity reports as Native or Asian or as multiracial? Or would he be in all three categories? In other words, does he show up on the same report in more than one place? Our support team's answer is always the same. In none of our ethnicity reports is a student identified in more than one racial or ethnic category on the same report. A student who identifies as multiracial will show up on that report under the group multiracial only. So, addressing question number 1, on the SWIS ethnicity reports, students are represented dependent upon how their ethnicity and race were identified when the student was added into the school's SWIS database. If they identified as a single race or ethnicity, they will show up under that single race or ethnic category on all 4 of the SWIS ethnicity reports. If they identified as being of more than one racial group, they will show up on the 4 SWIS ethnicity reports as a single student under the group multiracial. Let me demonstrate what I mean. When I open my school's ethnicity report, in the Risk Index report, I can see that we have no referrals for students who are Native and none for Asian students. But we do have these 2 referrals over here for multiracial students. And when I look at the students with referrals by ethnicity reports data table, I can see there are no students who identify as Native with a referral, none who identify as Asian with a referral, but we have 2 students who identify as multiracial, because both Stephen and Cheryl have a referral. So that addresses question number 1, how are multiracial students addressed in the SWIS ethnicity reports? Students who identify as being of 2 or more races show up on the SWIS ethnicity report and in the data table as multiracial. No student shows up in more than one racial or ethnic category on the same ethnicity report. For question number 2, our support team is sometimes asked about how a multiracial student is identified when using the SWIS Drilldown tool. Considering our newly added student, Cheryl, a support team might receive a question like, we have a black and white multiracial student, and we're wondering how that student is counted when using SWIS Drilldown. To best answer this question, let's first talk about how SWIS Drilldown works. Drilldown is a tool built to filter information for any group of students who, 1, have a referral, and 2, fit the identifying characteristics listed in either the Include in Dataset or the Exclude in Dataset section of the tool. If we place any identified characteristic from the report filters in either the Include or the Exclude in Dataset sections and click on the Generate button, all the students in the school population who have been entered in SWIS and 1, have a referral, and 2, have the identified characteristics listed will be either included or excluded in the resulting data set, depending, of course, upon where the user places each filtering characteristic. For example, when we open the SWIS Drilldown tool, by default, we see that the current school year is listed in the Include in Dataset section. If we click on Generate, the tool will give us all the students in the school who have received a referral during the current school year because the only filter entered in the Include in Dataset section is the current school year. So all the students in the demo school who have received a referral during the current school year will be included in the resulting data set when the user clicks Generate. In order to be listed in the data set after clicking on Generate, a student has to have met a characteristic listed in the Include in Dataset section of the tool. On the other hand, if they have a characteristic that is listed in the Exclude in Dataset section, they will not be listed in the resulting data set, even if they did have a characteristic that we had placed in the Include in Dataset. In the Drilldown tool, Include includes students with that characteristic, but Exclude excludes students with a characteristic. In the Drilldown tool, Exclude in Dataset supersedes Include in Dataset. Okay, now that we know how the tool works, let's look at how Drilldown considers multiracial students. If we go over to the report filters and open the race and ethnicity folder in the demographics section, we can double-click or drag and drop any one of these racial or ethnic groups into either the Include or Exclude in Dataset sections of the tool. If for the school year 2019 and 20, we place the Asian group into the Include in Dataset section and click Generate, we would get all the students with a referral who were enrolled in our demo school during the 2019-20 school year and who had identified as Asian. And here in our resulting data set, we can see that Stephen is listed because he identifies as Asian as well as Native, and he has a referral. His Asian identity allows him to be included in our data set. Using the same logic pattern, if for the school year 2019-20, we place the multiracial group into the Include in Dataset section and click Generate, we would get all the students with a referral who were enrolled in the demo school during the 2019-20 school year and who had also identified as being of more than one race. And here, among the students we listed, we can see both Stephen and Cheryl. Stephen identified as Native and Asian, and Cheryl identified as both black and white. Both students are multiracial, and both have a referral. But now let's see what happens when we use the Exclude in Dataset filter. If I put multiracial back into the Include in Dataset box and click Generate, again we see Stephen and Cheryl because both students identified as being of more than one race. If we then drag and drop Asian into the Exclude in Dataset and click Generate, we see in our resulting dataset the list of students who are multiracial, but excluding those who identify as Asian. So we see our multiracial students listed, including Cheryl, because she is identified as being black and white. But we don't see Stephen, because he identified as Native and Asian, and in this generated data set, students who identified as Asian are excluded. So the Drilldown tool works depending upon which filters you place in the including data set or excluding data set box. If they have a filter characteristic that is in the including data set box and have a referral, they'll be listed in our final generated data set, unless they have a filter characteristic that is in the excluding data set box, in which case they'll be excluded from that resulting data set. Remember, exclude supersedes include. An important question we also need to address, though, is how are Hispanic Latino students counted in both of these tools? Our support team may get a question wondering, if students identify as Hispanic, how are they addressed on the SWIS ethnicity report and the SWIS Drilldown tool? Are they treated like the multiracial students? Is it the same as for the other reports? For race and ethnicity reporting purposes, the federal government requires schools to collect racial and ethnic information about the student. Schools are directed to first identify whether the student is Hispanic or Latino, or non-Hispanic or Latino. This ethnicity identification is always done prior to identifying any or all racial identifications. First, we identify one's ethnicity as Hispanic or non-Hispanic. Then, we identify their race. Ethnicity is always counted first. On the SWIS ethnicity reports, when a student identifies as Hispanic Latino, that student will show up only as Hispanic Latino. They will not be included in any other racial subgroup, no matter which or how many racial identities they represent. In federal race and ethnicity reports, ethnicity always supersedes race. It's always addressed first. In the Drilldown tool, though, the Hispanic Latino student will show up in whatever racial or ethnic categories they have identified with, but the student will not show up as multiracial, no matter how many races they have identified. Once they have identified as Hispanic Latino, they will be represented in that ethnic group first. The SWIS user can drill down and find that student in any single racial group that the student identifies with, but a Hispanic Latino student will never show up in the multiracial category, no matter how many additional racial groups they represent. To help explain this, let me introduce you to one more student. Jorge Ramos is a Hispanic Latino male who identifies as both white and Native. We recently found out that Jorge was also involved in the cafeteria food fight along with Stephen and Cheryl, and has now received a referral as well. In the SWIS ethnicity report, Jorge shows up as a Latino student. We now see his referral indicated in both the graph and the data table. He is not included in any of the other racial categories. He identifies as Hispanic, and in the 4 ethnicity reports, he will only show up in the Hispanic Latino category. In Drilldown, when we generate a report for Hispanic Latino students, we see Jorge listed because he identifies as Hispanic, and he has a referral. If we generate a report for white students, we see Jorge in the list of students with a referral. And if we generate a report for Native, we also see Jorge listed because he identifies as both of these races, as well as Hispanic. But when we generate a report for multiracial students with a referral, Jorge is not listed among our students who identify as of more than one race. This is because the federal government recognizes that Jorge is Hispanic and identifies him only as that. We can find him listed in a drill down for any single racial identity, but Hispanic Latino students are not identified as multiracial when we use the drill down tool, no matter how many races they identify with. This may seem incongruous or illogical, but that's just the way the federal racial and ethnic identification reports work. And so, to be in compliance with the federal reporting process, that is the way we have designed the SWIS Drilldown tool to work as well. Well, that about sums it up. In the SWIS ethnicity reports, no student is shown in more than one category on any page of the report, ever. In Drilldown, the Include in report and the Exclude in report filters do just that. They include all the students identified with a certain characteristic in the report, unless another characteristic is used that excludes them from that report. And Hispanic Latino students are identified as Latino in the SWIS ethnicity report and are identified by any individual ethnic or racial characteristic they identify with in a Drilldown report. But Hispanic Latino students are not included in a Drilldown for multiracial students, no matter how many races that student may identify with. Thank you for joining us in this video. We hope that it has helped you better understand how the SWIS ethnicity and the SWIS Drilldown tools work to efficiently and effectively give you better decision-making data. Now, please go enjoy your day and make more informed decisions using these valuable PBIS application tools. So long.